This book is really about technologists. We've got a lot of tech businesses and aspiring tech entrepreneurs in New Zealand. Certainly is a way a lot of people are thinking about making money, is going into a tech business. What I decided to write is, for a lot of the technologists, one of the hardest things to learn is the art of sales. And there's a lot of American sales books around that talk about, do this, do that. They're quite descriptive, whereas what I've decided to do is write it in a style of a novel. So it's a fiction that depicts a fictionary bunch of characters and gives us a taste of how you can master the art of sales in order to build up your tech business.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Ways to Wealth. We've got Igor Portugal here, who has a really interesting story about wealth, and he has distilled that into a book. We'll hear more about it in this story, but essentially, Igor, how about I give you the floor to introduce yourself? Give us the too long didn't read.
Oh, thanks, Charlie. I've been in the IT industry for nearly 30 years. I've went a fairly interesting way into wealth. I've made all my money building businesses, and I've lost all my money investing in property. So some people do it the other way around. I did it this way around. But luckily, I managed to turn the tables around. So now my property portfolio actually making me money, and I'm
Nice.
building a new business portfolio as well. This book is really about technologists. We've got a lot of tech businesses and aspiring tech entrepreneurs in New Zealand, quite a vibrant ecosystem. And
Totally.
certainly is a way a lot of people are thinking about making money, is going into a tech business. And what I decided to write is, for a lot of the technologists, one of the hardest things to learn is the art of sales. And there's a lot of American sales books around that talk about, do this, do that. They're quite descriptive, bit of a manually books. Whereas what I've decided to do is write it in a style of a novel. So it's a fiction that depicts a fictionary bunch of characters and gives us a taste of
That's interesting.
a taste of how you can master the art of sales in order to build up your tech business.
That's awesome. Well, sales cures all.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. So, I've gone through your history and looked, kind of the arc that you've gone on, and you've been in the game for very long. You've had obviously a bunch of your own businesses where you ran those businesses. But there must have been a moment in history where, you had a aha moment about you wanting to be an entrepreneur and you wanting to build business and own equity.
Yeah. Well, look, owning equity, to my mind, is one of the best ways to create wealth in New Zealand. Thanks God we do not have a capital gains tax in this country.
Totally.
Long that may leave. And a lot of the conversations around capital gains tax, when people talk about it, circles around property ownership, right? But what a lot of people forget is that New Zealand is a country of small businesses, and a lot of small businesses are running on a smell of an oily rag without making any money. And where these entrepreneurs that really make money is when they sell the business, because that's where this lack of capital gains tax kicks in. And we're all like to moan about cost of living and cost of things in New Zealand. But if you think about a lot of small businesses that you interact with on a daily basis, they don't actually make a lot of money. They run relatively neutral without much of a profit, and the entrepreneurs make their money when they sell the business. Right. So I've done this a few times.
Yeah.
I've built two successful businesses that I've built up and sold. First one gave me a deposit for a house in Auckland. Second one paid off the mortgage. So it's a great way to actually build up wealth and build up a retirement.
Totally. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
non-linear, right?
it is not linear. No, absolutely non-linear.
That's cool. And was there a specific moment where you were like, "Oh, I've got to do this," or was it just a rational decision around, "Oh, well, there's no capital gains tax, so therefore it's a pretty efficient way to do it," or what was the
Now,
rationale?
this realization and knowledge came much later in my journey. When I started my first business, I was young and I was naive, and I'm glad I was, because if I wasn't, I probably wouldn't have gone there. I
Right.
had no idea what I was doing. It was the 90s. I was trained as a software developer, and I was reading all these newspaper articles and information about all these overnight
Yeah.
millionaires, and how people create all sorts of different business models and businesses. And I thought, I gotta get a piece of the action. I gotta do something, right? And I really just jump in headlong into this. I walked into a computer shop one day to buy my first computer, of all things, because even though I'm a software developer, all the computers I used to interact with until that time was in my employer's workplace or the university. So I walked
Totally.
into this computer shop to buy my first computer, and there was this guy called Nigel, and I started talking to him, and I said, you guys ever get a business customers in this outfit? He said, yeah, all the time. And do you provide them with any kind of IT support? And he said, not really. We don't really, not really equipped for that. And I said, well, why don't we set up a JV? When you get a business customer, I'll come in and support them. And that was
Mm.
the start of my first business.
Oh, nice. Cool. That's a really good business. That's not a .com business. That's a utilizing the adoption of technology within businesses, and then kind of servicing the needs, because not everyone is well informed about that, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Ah,
So, yeah.
that's cool. Mm. Okay, so you kind of stumble into your first project where you do a JV, when you are lucky enough to have almost, you're standing on the shoulder of a giant, even though it may not be a real giant, but you
But
got to basically leverage another
absolutely.
business, other equity.
Yeah.
That was equity built up.
You, you,
There.
you're absolutely right. But there was a bit of a sad story in that, in that whole business, because there were two things. One, I, I was a software developer. I was a experienced techie with a
Yep.
veiled disdain for salespeople. Salespeople to me were, these guys don't know what they're doing. They kind of waste the space. Uh,
Right.
and so I thought, I'm not going to have to do any sales. These guys are going to bring me customers, so I'm just going to survive on that.
Right.
Uh, so it took me about 2 years to realize, actually, if you want to succeed in business, you need to do sales. So I didn't really get much. I got a couple of clients out of that relationship, but then 2 years later, the computer store spectacularly went bust.
Oh,
I've
okay.
lost about $20,000 in that transaction, and it was, if you think about how much do you pay for education, for me, that $20,000 was the cheapest MBA that I could have ever gotten, because I got to see what happens when a business goes bust, and it all spectacularly goes up in flames. I got to
Mm.
see what the creditors do, who is going to come after you and who will not, what you need to watch out for, why businesses collapse, and things like that. As it happened with this particular business, there was a fairly simple mathematical error in the business owner's calculation, but I've learned about it much later. Sitting there next door to the boss's office and having suppliers, Chinese suppliers, coming in and saying, well, where's the money? Are we going to do it Chinese way or a Kiwi way? And he said, well, what's the Kiwi way? He said, Kiwi way, you pay us tomorrow. I've never actually learned what Chinese way meant. I hope to never learn that. But he obviously didn't do it the Kiwi way either, because he didn't have any money. But it was a very simple mathematical error at that time. The GST was 12.5%, right?
Right.
And then all the quotes that you get for any equipment, they're GST exclusive. And so what he used to do is he used to decide he's going to be the cheapest company in town. So he was doing lots of transactions. So he'd take the quote from the supplier and add 10% to all the materials and think 10% is going to be okay. Except he forgot that when he sells things to a customer, it's GST inclusive. When he buys it, it's GST exclusive. So basically, on every transaction, he'd lose 2.5%.
Oh. Oh.
So so that didn't really work as a business model.
No.
Ended up shutting down the business, losing the house, bankrupting himself, and teaching me the most valuable MBA lesson I could ever find.
That's fair enough. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of truly in the weeds with it.
Oh yeah.
But then your business was attached to it. So did you continue once?
Yeah. So what happened is I was a big advocate early in the day of an operating system called Linux. And in those days, these operating systems mattered, and I've imported a couple of box sets of a thing called the SUSE Linux, and I get a phone call one day because I was also contracting at the same time and still doing some contract software development.
Of course.
I get a contact one day, and this guy calls me and says, "Is this Igor Portugal?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I've just been to your computer shop and bought one of your Linux boxes, and the computer sales guy told me that you were the Linux whiz." And I said, "Yep, sure." And he goes, "I want to go to business with you."
Okay.
So, needless to say, when this whole collapse happened, I've rang up Chris. Chris Hagan was his name, and I said, "Yeah, let's do this business thing." So he's invested some money. He's invested about $50,000, and I've transitioned whatever little business I've had in the previous company, and we got going, and that was the start of the first successful IT business.
Right. Nice. Awesome. And then you used that to basically exited that.
I exited that, and once I've exited that and got the first paycheck, then I realized actually this makes sense. You build a business, you exit the business, you make the money. You don't really make much money paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah, but then I guess you allocated your win to something after, right? You kind of had a sprint.
Bought a house.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So you So you
put
up equity
in the next business.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So you then diversified slightly, but then pushed some of those winnings into your next venture, right?
Yeah, next venture. And I also done a lot of property investing. I've invested in a bunch of leasehold properties.
Right.
So that was a little bit. I've made some mistakes in that, and probably lost quite a bit of money on that.
Okay. Because when everyone in New Zealand, we're going to get into this, I'm sure, but everyone in New Zealand talks about property and owns property and kind of lives by it no matter what. However, I always find out, that at least in order of eventually acquiring the full asset and the full equity in the property, you go through quite a lot of pain.
Yeah. There is a lot of pain. I personally think that property, if you live not far away from your property that you're managing, property managers is almost a waste of time. You got to manage your own property, because otherwise you're just paying a whack of cash that you don't necessarily have as an income.
Well, and there's more accountability, isn't there, on repairing it? So then you actually are also paying more maintenance fees if you have a property manager, most likely, I imagine. Because, for example, we don't have a property manager. We have a landlord who is self-managing, but they live elsewhere. So, but, in terms of if we had a property manager and we had more interaction with them, then we would probably be more like, oh, well, this isn't actually that great. It's, it needs more work, etc. Because I kind of think of the amount of times that I've actually spoken to my landlord about something has been next to zero in, 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
And I guess but the dynamic's slightly different when you have property managers, I guess, because there's just more interaction. Yeah. I guess there's swings and roundabouts as well. Like, the rationale behind it is that the asset, I guess, stays better because it's more regularly maintained, but then there are more costs associated with that for sure, I can imagine.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just, by not having a manager, you've got just that potentially better margins. So where do you think people go wrong in property?
Well, I can tell you where I went wrong in property. So I've invested in a number of leaseholds, and they were cash positive at first, but then I went in 2007, 2008. I went through a lease renewal just at the height of the property values.
Yeah.
And then the market went crash. Rents went down. I couldn't put the rents up for a very long time. And I've had a number of properties. I've just way overextended myself. And I was...
Are you talking about the leverage that you had to use in order to get the properties?
Yeah. And their value just plummeted way below what I paid for them. So I couldn't get rid of them without, it costing me a lot of money. And so I ended up...
You don't want to sell because you don't want to realize the loss. And also you're getting hit by that interest expense every year, not to mention that, you're maybe cash flow break even, but probably, maybe at a whole level cash flow.
Well, I was cash flow negative. I was hugely cash flow, because in those days, I don't know if you remember 2007, 2008, everybody was negatively geared because everyone was exploiting the tax benefits that you get by buying residential property. So I was no exception. So I was huge. I ended up being hugely negatively geared with a fair bit of debt, and my income wasn't rising. It was a pretty tough time. I had to fork out net about 50 grand every year to fund these properties, and that was, if I calculate the cash that I plowed into this, plus the effect that it had on me, if I had access to that cash, what I could have done with it, I think I would have lost in excess of $1 million over the years.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing that we've gone through because, as a part of our business, of a part of Acuity, we've built this technology that makes it very easy for people to dollar cost average into liquid investments at a fraction of the cost of everyone else, but also with with our membership model, which actually kind of provides some level of context and guidance, right? A shoulder to talk to. And what we also do with companies is we run financial wellbeing programs with them. And we don't give people advice because obviously advice is also about a recommendation of product. But what we do is we actually talk to them about what's going on in their world. Like, what's their personal balance sheet like? What's the personal income statement like? Yeah. And what I've noticed kind of at a macro level in New Zealand is we have some amazing earners that are being completely held back by having their cash flow completely taken away by all of the financial products essentially that have been sold to them in this pursuit of, wealth, I guess, right? I mean, that's ultimately what it is. Why do you go and get a rental property? I guess you go and get a rental property because you think that you're going to be building equity and you're building assets.
Yeah.
But you're also taking on that second side of the balance sheet, which actually is kind of maybe underappreciated at an everyday level. Because I kind of think, kind of from a technical perspective of balance sheets, that makes a huge difference when you've almost got maybe an income that's equivalent, that's going towards interest.
Yeah. 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 No, you look.
So
You
how did
absolutely.
you? Sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt. How did you? So what did you do?
What did I do? Well, my second business was successful as well. So when I've exited that, I managed to pay down the mortgage, and that made things easier. And by that time, rents caught up as well.
Nice.
And then I faced my next challenge in life, and that's called the divorce. So I've had to split everything in half.
Yeah.
And at that point, we've liquidated pretty much all of the properties that we had. And then I had to get a new mortgage, and I got a new investment property portfolio now.
Right.
But in the meantime, I have learned some lessons about what works in the world of business, and how to make money, how to build business. I've also learned some lessons about what works and what doesn't work in the world of property, and now my property portfolio is doing reasonably well for me, and so I've got this balance that's working where I've got the ability to build businesses and ability to store and create equity in property, and between the two, that's a supercharged equity generator.
Yeah, because you recycle. Well, I mean, there are other ways to do it too, right?
Yeah,
Other you just
yes,
use
yeah,
you can
yeah,
use other stores of wealth, but basically what you're saying is you graft and you sprint in a business exercise where
yeah,
you basically grow a business and sell it.
yeah.
Grow the sales to a point where there is an acquirer that's going to give you a liquidity opportunity
Yeah.
where you basically get a payout. And actually, if you think about it, that's right up the risk scale, right? Like you go and start a new business, you invest in a new business. That's an extreme. I guess there's another side, which is, hey, go and work for Google, earn Google shares, and
Yeah.
then use that compensation as your equity position for building your wealth, and then getting the mortgage, and then doing the next jump and the next jump and the next jump, because
And
there
some people
are
do,
different
and
ways, right?
some people do, but I'm a risk taker, so I like that balance where I've got on one hand a reasonably safe store of equity in the residential property, and then on
Yeah.
the other hand high risk in a business shares where it's a startup, it's a high risk game. But because
What?
it's a high risk game, and because I'm in control of that game, I can affect it. I feel reasonably safe with it,
Yeah.
because it largely depends on what I do, and not
Yeah.
what
True.
not necessarily
Totally.
what market does, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. You're exposed to more, I guess, theoretical market consequences in property and public equities,
Yeah,
or bonds even,
yeah,
and to a degree term deposits, because what are you getting paid on a term deposit? And of course, even the currency you're in
yeah.
has an impact, especially in this day
Mhm.
and age. Um, so did you recalibrate the amount of leverage you took? Is that what saved you? Was it basically by getting the leverage mix right? Because to
Um,
me, it just seems like having a lot of obligations to pay money on debt is what catches almost everyone in some
Absolutely.
way, shape, or form. That's what gets you.
Absolutely. Now, I definitely recalibrated my leverage, and also sort of the income to debt ratio is much more balanced right now.
Yeah, I have a little rule that I've come up with and I've talked about with my wife a lot, and a lot of my wealth is in my business, but also equities.
Yeah.
Um, but I've always said to my wife, look, I would only buy a property if the interest and the interest and the expenses are less than what we pay for rent for where we want to live. And
Sure.
that's just always been my thing. I'm not even going to think about it. And for a long time, obviously, in zero interest rates, kind of people would look at you funny. But for the last 4 years, I've been able to pursue my business in part because I didn't have almost definitely because we didn't have a mortgage, for sure. So it's a. Did you feel like that was holding you back in operating the business then? The amount of leverage you did have versus now?
No. So the only time I felt held back is when I exited my second business, and my ex-wife told me we're not going to start another business until we sort out our money-losing portfolio.
Which was the property.
Which was the property.
Right.
So I first sorted out my relationship with my ex-wife, and then I sorted out the property. And now I don't feel like I'm held back on anything because I can make my own decisions, and I've got the right.
So did you liquidate a lot of that portfolio in order to kind of?
Yep, I've had to liquidate everything.
Not now, but back then.
Back then, yeah. That was 2020. Yeah, 2020. I've liquidated everything I had. Ended up with cash. We split up the cash in half.
Yep.
And then I've reinvested.
Okay. Yep. Yeah, that makes sense.
At
Yeah.
At the right level.
Nice. Okay. And is there any tools like we've got really great budgeting and forecasting tools on our site, just Google Sheets, interactive ones, and we have our own that we've built up that we use in our financial well-being consultations. Is there anything that you use practically to help you kind of organize that, or?
Not really. I run a lot on experience and intuition, but I've had a lot of exposure to investment tools. One of my early clients in my first business was the now failed blue chip investment empire, Mark Bryars. If people know, ended up being burned dealing with him, as a lot of people have. But one thing that I have learned is I was helping him because at the time we started working together, he was running $100 million business on a set of spreadsheets, and those spreadsheets were failing. So he asked me to help him fix up the links. And so I sat down, and I was fortunate enough to go through and understand those spreadsheets and how things work in the property market. So I actually really understand some of the basic formulas and how things work.
So was this a property person then?
Yeah, well, Blue Chip was a huge. They were doing these rent to buy schemes and backed by investors who were providing the capital for people who couldn't afford it. It was quite a Ponzi scheme, and it felt spectacular.
There's a lot of rent to buy and a lot of people trying to innovate in that space. Could you explain what went wrong with it? Why it didn't succeed?
Look, I don't know all the details, so I can't because it basically collapsed after I stopped dealing with the company, and there was some there were some things that were going on in that business that were not very kosher.
So it's kind of mismanaged. Was it not then product market fit? So if someone had a good, you have a good team around you, a CFO and staff, and like a really experienced team for the property development and the buying and the sourcing the investors, so it was kind of an execution problem, perhaps.
I think it was a bit of a Ponzi scheme at the end. It was like taking money from Peter to pay Paul kind of thing, the way it was structured. And the way the way they've made those investments is they've ended up, a lot of people ended up overextending themselves in those investments. They had accountants and lawyers and all the people that should have been independent advisors, but they had them working for the company. So they would find investors through investor seminars and then provide all of the what should have been an independent advice from that company. So there was a combination of things. There were investors that weren't they shouldn't have really been investors. There were projects within the company that were over leveraged, and a number of other factors. But to tell you the truth, I haven't been privy to the nuts and bolts of what went
Okay,
wrong.
I was just interested because obviously there's a lot of
Yeah.
there is a lot of investment out there these days trying to do social housing, different rent to buys. So I am just quite fascinated to
Yeah.
think about what how you take the mortgage out, because that's a very complex because that's essentially what a lot of these structures are trying to do, right? Is they're trying to take out the mortgage and create a return for investors while giving the
Yeah.
opportunity for people to build equity. So, yeah, just super interested by it. But no, if you don't have great information, that's all good. I just was kind of interested by, that kind of more rent to buy space more so than if it was a poor execution and kind of other stuff unrelated to, I guess, the product, then I guess
Yeah.
that's
To be,
not too interesting.
I can't really comment, to be honest. But
No problem. No problem. So what about generational wealth? Have you thought about that much?
generational wealth. Tell me more about that. What do you mean by that?
So how do you pass information and assets onto the next generation in an effective way?
That's a very good question. So I haven't. I know that my father passed information onto me. He figured out how to build wealth in New Zealand. He came here in his 50s, and he managed to build up quite a bit of wealth within about 10 years before he passed away.
Yeah.
And he was an economist, and he probably taught me quite a lot. So, teaching your kids, giving them knowledge is excellent. But other than that, don't know.
What was the greatest lesson he taught you?
The greatest lesson is rely on yourself and make sure that you're responsible for your actions and decisions, and learn maths. Have a good grasp of maths, because
Nice.
a lot of these things are just basic high school mathematics.
Totally.
It's amazing how many people don't get simple maths.
And I guess kind of digging into that a little bit. Digging into that in this day and age, like, okay, how do I teach my kids, right? Mathematics is a good base. First principles is perfect.
Yeah.
But of course they have this incredible tool that, with the tools they have, there's one that they may not have as deep knowledge because they will get too many answers for themselves through programs in the world of AI.
Yeah.
But they'll also have this great productivity tool and this, this whole infrastructure built out for them where programs, functions can just run for you at a very low cost, either from a phone or the internet or your laptop. They're not going to maybe have a job. The only thing, like the price of time is essentially going to zero, no?
I would argue the other way around.
Okay.
I would argue the other way around. So there's a lot of people out there talking about this whole world of AI, where they're concerned about AI taking on the jobs, and people losing jobs to AI. And to counter that, I wrote a thesis a couple of years ago where I'm showcasing that actually AI will lead us to full employment. And when you're talking about the price of time that that a human contributes is basically what drives our economy. So value that we create in our economy, and it actually comes to that capital, that wealth that you're talking about for people to create. It comes from the basic price of the human labor, and the value that is created is when two humans exchange goods that or services that are a product of their time. So the very nature of money, the very nature of value that we're creating, the very nature of capital that we're creating, is based on humans exchanging time. And
Well,
so
currently.
no, it's not currently. It's the fundamentals. That's where we're talking about maths. That's where it comes from, right? You can't replace that. That
Well,
doesn't.
what
replace.
if, well, like for example, you know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, someone signs up to an investment brokerage, traditional brokerage. They go and fill out forms, and there's a person that goes and basically grabs the forms, fills them out with the user, helps them get through that process, and then does all the requirements in order for them to be accepted, and then they're onboarded. Now, I agree that relationships is the new time, and for you to actually interact with that system that's going to engage where you sign up, you're going to have a relationship, probably with a brand, an idea, or a human. Yes, totally agree. But the time that you need to run servers, write code, even potentially look at balance sheets and do kind of legal work, isn't that reducing the amount of the cost, the incremental cost of an hour or a minute? And isn't that a good thing?
No, it doesn't reduce the incremental cost of the human hour that's delivering value. What
So
it
that
does,
means that it gets more. It gets more then, does it?
no, what it does is you're employing some tools to make the cost of a specific service or product less, right? But then the value still gets created by humans exchanging time. So the fundamentals are still the same. It's now the service is cheaper, which means you can build up more incremental services, because then the time exchange is still going to be the same, but the product, the resulting output is going to be a lot more, right? And so this has been like that throughout the human history, and it's been accelerating incrementally. And
the units of productivity. Sorry, you go.
Yeah, sorry. Let me just finish this. So fundamentally, the value gets created from the human input. The tools in between, the value of those tools is what goes to zero. So whatever the tools can do, the people attribute less and less value to that. But what the tools allow them to do is they allow them to create bigger and more interesting services to solve much bigger challenges and much bigger interesting things that humans are interested in. And
so can I jump in here, because I'm intrigued. So that means that actually the incremental units of productivity have been forever increasing due to technological advances, and that means technically the fundamental cost of an hour may actually go to $1,000 an hour, because of the amount of output that an hour can have due to machines.
Yeah. May I suggest something else?
Yeah.
The fundamental cost of an hour stays static, and everything else fluctuates around it. Okay. The number 1,000 is meaningless. What we call $1,000 today, 100 years ago would have been $2 or $1.
Yeah.
So all these numbers, they are kind of, they have a meaning in today's world or in this moment's world, but they are impacted by, fundamentally, they are impacted by what, the technology available, plus the amount of people available to do the thing, right?
Okay.
So you just flip it on a different side. The value gets created when somebody does something, right?
But
If you sit
what happens? What happens if I only need 3 people to service my business now, rather than 100, which my predecessor has?
That's fine. Your business output is going to, so while you have technological advantage, your business output for a short period is going to give you that extra capital, which you can then store away. But eventually it will recalibrate, because everyone will have access to the same technology. And whatever you can do, whatever you could do with 100 people 10 years ago, and now you can do with 3. Now, the value of your output in relative terms is going to be 30 times less. So
Right.
yes, you will produce 3 people's worth of value.
Where does that cash flow and equity ultimately go to then, in an example where you're not having to pay 100 employees? Where does the cash flow and the equity go?
Well, it depends what you mean. There's a lot of terms in that sentence that have sort of interrelation. So when you're talking about cash flow, if you think about a cash flow of a company of 100 years ago, that was $1 million, right? In today's terms, that cash flow would represent maybe 10, 20, $100 million, right?
200
So,
million, maybe.
more. So the dollar calibration very much depends on the input that people provide into the economy and the output that actually provides. If you talk about, if you take an average person of 1900s, right, early 1900s or late 1800s, they wouldn't go further than 10, 20 kilometers from where they actually were born for the entirety of their life. And nowadays, most people have been around the world 2 or 3 times, right? And if you think about the cost of that in dollars, if you try and measure that in dollar terms of 1900, you'd think that we're all billionaires right now, but we're not. It's just what's available becomes cheaper. So when you provide a service with 3 people that before used to be 100 people, you will make money for a brief period of time, and you can store that away as capital, right? You can put it into property, you can put it into something, but your income, your higher than usual income of all these 97 people that you just reduced will only be very short-lived, right? So you need to keep innovating, you need to keep making those leaps in order to keep creating value and in order to keep creating wealth.
Right. Totally. Yes. That
So
makes total sense.
So that's how it works. And in effect, they did a study on 150 years worth of technological advancements and the correlation between technology and jobs. And the funny thing is, the more technology makes things easier for people to do, the less unemployment that we have. And what AI and all this modern technology is currently is going to do is it's going to reduce that theoretical unemployment even further down. I mean, you've got practical unemployment with people who just don't want to work. That's a different conversation, or can't for physical reasons, right? But even that, one of the things AI will enable to do is people with mental disabilities or physical disabilities being able to contribute their labor and contribute to the society more fully than they could 10, 20 years ago.
That's absolutely true. Like, if you think about someone that's perhaps blind, now with AI, they can be fully productive almost.
100%. Yeah, exactly. And so So what that means is that will even increase the size of our economy. If you look at the average family in the 50s, you have men working and women sitting at home, right? That was how, 30s, 40s. That was how it was. Okay, like full employment meant every man's working, every woman doesn't, right?
Yeah,
Now we're talking about employment. The whole society is employed. So that's changed due to the society changing, but also technology changing, because some of the roles, could you imagine a woman in a battle in 1600s, 1700s? That wasn't very common. I mean, it was possible, but it wasn't very common. You look at even today's armies, they have people of all
totally.
sexes. Construction, you can have anyone doing some of the heavy lifting that you didn't used to think everybody could do. And same's going to happen with our mental capacity. There will be people who may have lower ability to understand concepts that will be able to understand them now with the help of AI and
Right.
contribute and be creative, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, no, I think it's a supercharging tool, right?
Yeah,
That you
but,
can
but what it
utilize.
does, but what it does is it creates friction. And so when you, here's, I'll go back to your example. So you now have a company that can do with 3 people what it used to be able to do with 100 people. What happens to the other 97 people? Well, they're going to create another 33 of those companies, right? So now where you had one company, you're going to have 35, and they will
Hmm.
all be producing at the same level of that first company in the first place.
So then, how do you differentiate yourself then? Because I agree, it's almost like the creator economy. It's what just won the election in the
Yeah,
US, right? It's the
yeah,
creator economy is in full force, and that's actually why you've not seen a complete economic meltdown in this cycle versus every other, because there's distributed cash flow through
absolutely.
households that's
Yeah,
far less exposed to economic shocks, because there's one car factory that's employing the whole town, where they all work that, or it's in the city and there's a big layoffs. Now, if you're getting layoffs, but you have Uber, you have other ways of getting income, you have
absolutely.
a movement of more and more contractors and consultants that have a distributed income stream. So I guess that creates a lot of resilience
Yeah,
in the labor market, which perhaps wouldn't have been possible a long time ago.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, how do you differentiate yourself? By being you. We're all different, and we all bring something unique. And you differentiate yourself by being you. If you're talking about business, right? How do you differentiate your business versus others? The fundamentals of business differentiation do not change with advanced technology. You still need to find niches where you can contribute better. You still have these personal relationships that you need to build and exploit to the max, right? At the end of the day, we're all human and we're tribal. We work with people we know, and that's going to continue. And if you take this fundamental premise that value gets created when two humans exchange value, right? Then you still need to place more value on these human relationships. Every relationship you have becomes that much more
Well,
important.
wherever there's an acceptance of exchange in value, so that means technically an AI agent could buy something.
Well, if AI agent will buy something on behalf of a human, right? So you can outsource some of your
Or an
buying,
entity, which
or
ultimately gets back to a human,
typically
which
gets
is
back.
the shareholder.
Exactly. And so then the question is, if everyone ran AI agents buying something, is going to be a race to zero in the buying thing, and then you will differentiate yourself the minute you jump in and do this instead of AI as a human. Because
Totally true.
I'm just going to circumvent all your AIs, go straight to the seller and say, mate, let's go have a drink. I'll give you a better deal than anybody else. I just
Hmm.
screwed up the system.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, I mean, again, it comes back down to that social equity then.
Exactly. Yeah. And
You know,
so I think that
people.
social equity is going to be more and more important. The more we automate, the more.
Would we say that Google's a value and how it's so? I mean, it's how it's so valuable now from a market cap perspective. You know, these are asset like businesses. You look at the balance sheet and you would say, "Oh, wow, 3 trillion almost. That's crazy."
Yeah.
Perhaps if you were to look at it in a certain place, but would you see? I'll say ultimately it's social capital that drives those multiples and valuations in some kind of
Um,
direct but indirect way.
no, in the case of Google, it's probably more their technological innovation that drives
Yeah.
that value. So they keep on replacing 100 people with three, and they just keep on doing these iterations. And every time they do that, they get a bump, and then another bump, and then another bump, and then they throw that value into market protection mechanism. I mean, it's a valid way of growing a business. You just got to understand that they're not doing it at anybody's expense. They're doing when they do that, those technological advancements, is they create net new equity, net new value. They're not taking it from anyone else.
Mm. So to kind of come into land, then, what would, if you were to say the three things that people would take away from your book, what would they be?
Oh, the three things that you would take. So my book is more about how you build those relationships, how you build the relationships with clients. And the number one thing that people will take away from my book is when you deal with clients, especially in a business to business
Yeah.
setting, it's about them. It's not about you. And you actually have to get into their world and understand their pain
Mm.
and their needs
Yeah.
before you produce any kind of solution.
Yeah.
It's nothing to do with your product or service. It's everything to do with what they need. And it's a
Right.
little bit like what you said you guys are providing. So you kind of sit down with the client and understand how they make their money, what their world looks like in terms of investment, what they
Well,
will.
really, in terms of holistically wealth, right? Because someone might not be investing in equities or something regularly, but they might be looking to go out on their own.
Absolutely. So the number one thing my book talks about is understanding where the person that you're dealing with is at and where they want to be, and how to bridge that connection, right?
Totally.
And I talk that there's a physical distance between where you are and where you want to be, and then how you get there. I call it the cost of travel, which you need to identify. And as long as the
Right.
cost of travel is less than the physical distance, then you've got something that you can offer.
Awesome. Wicked. That's awesome. Thank
Yeah,
you so much. It's been a really interesting episode. I've learned a lot. It's been a good debate of ideas and kind of thinking about the bigger picture and how some of these things are going to interplay with each other. And it kind of all stems back to ownership, equity ownership, and building up that resiliency through relationships, I guess.
absolutely. Yeah, relationship.
So if you want to give us
Yeah.
if you want to give us your where you can, what the name of the book is, and the best place for the people to kind of find you, we'll obviously have links.
So the name of the book is Unasked Question. It's a technologist's quest to unlock the sales algorithm. You can find it on Amazon. It's available for pre-order in an ebook format, and it will be available for order in electronic and physical book format on the 1st of March.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.